Thank you. Hi, my name is Mark Cornblatt. I'm the CEO of the Aerial Sports League, which is an entertainment brand and community dedicated to the rising world of drone sports. But I'm also an addict, and I've been chasing the dragon all my life. What I'm addicted to, however, is called flow state. Flow state, in the zone, an out-of-body experience. There's a lot of ways that people use to describe flow state, but it can be somewhat difficult to explain and describe. Now, most lectures about flow state tend to be dry, scientific lectures filled with all kinds of technical jargon and neuroscience. This one's going to be a little bit different. This one's going to be filled with video games, Evel Knievel, and flying robots. Because while I don't claim to be an expert on flow state, I have spent my entire life chasing this idea, this unique mental process, and trying to understand exactly what flow state is. So, Mihai Csikszentmihalyi, a man who's considered the father of flow state theory, he describes flow state as being in a state where we're at our best, performing our best, and feeling our best. And while that can be a little bit vague, it actually gets to the heart of the matter of what flow state is really all about. Because flow state takes place entirely within the brain. It doesn't matter what your body is doing. As long as the conditions are right, you can enter into flow state. And what happens in the brain, in lay terms, is you get a cascade of neurochemicals, such as endorphins and dopamine and serotonin. And when people in flow state are analyzed in scientific settings, their brain chemistry looks very much like the brain chemistry of people on drugs, marijuana, MDMA, and cocaine. And so when we're in flow state, we're actually getting this cascade of chemicals that makes us feel really, really good. It's no surprise that people who experience flow state on a regular basis find those activities quite addicting. The other thing that the cascade of neurochemicals offers us is that they're actually performance-enhancing drugs in our brains. So when we're in flow state, we tend to have faster reflexes. We tend to make connections between ideas that are similar as well as ideas that are dissimilar. And there's a really interesting aspect to why flow state is so unique and so hard to describe, is because during this cascade of chemicals, the prefrontal cortex of the brain, the part of your brain that's essentially aware of itself, goes to sleep. And the part of the brain that is the voice in the back of your head, the little nagging critic in your head, that voice also goes to sleep and is silenced. And so it will allow you, if you're an artist or a creative, to take some risks that you wouldn't normally take. And if you're an athlete, you might try and go a little bit further than you've gone before and reach a little bit further. So these are some examples of the kinds of experiences people describe when they're in the flow state experience. Steve Kotler of the Flow Genome Institute describes a really interesting process that turned him onto flow state, which was he was somewhat ill and not feeling well and essentially ready to die. His life was feeling so bad. A friend took him out into the surf and put him on a surfboard, and he got to experience a little bit of the flow state while in the zone on the board. That was so transformative for him that he went out and continued surfing, and he managed to turn his life around. That feeling of depression and feeling of sickness went away, and he actually regained his health. And he attributes it to the experience of flow state while surfing. Mihai Csikszentmihalyi did a 10-year study of people in flow and found that not only did they describe feeling better, but generally feeling happier as well. And another study done by Steve Kotler on workers in an office setting found that workers who were in flow were actually able to get their work done at an efficiency rate that was 5 times greater than your typical office worker filled with distractions. So the benefits and the potential therapeutic aspects of flow have only just begun to be discovered. Now, this flow state experience has been around for as long as people have been around, but it's really been in the last few years, the last few decades really, where a bunch of technologies came on board that allowed millions and millions of people to experience flow state on a more regular basis. I'm talking about things like scuba equipment and parachutes and even mountain bikes and skateboards. All of these types of technologies didn't just introduce new forms of recreation, but they were giving the users an opportunity to get into this flow state. And flow state can happen to anybody at any time if the right conditions are met. But we're finding that extreme athletes in particular and creatives, people who focus quite a lot, tend to find themselves in this flow state more than others. So you still may be asking yourself, what is flow state and how do you describe it? So for me, if I may, when I was a child, I had 3 experiences of flow state that were hard to describe as a young child, but were absolutely transformative. And the first was while playing the game Asteroids. And when I was a kid, every quarter I could beg, borrow, or steal would go into the game at the arcade. And at a certain point, I had essentially mastered the game, and I still loved it. So imagine one day I sort of woke up. I came back into my body, into awareness of the fact that I was in front of the machine. I was watching the video screen, and my hands were on the controls. I was surrounded by people who had been watching me play, and I had won so many free lives that they literally ran off the edge of the screen. But I had no recollection of the last hour or 2 of playing that game whatsoever. I was in the zone, in that perfect state that we call the flow state, where I was performing at my best, I felt terrific, and yet I had no recollection whatsoever. And the reason that is because when that prefrontal cortex shuts down, time seems to dilate. The part of our body or the part of our mind that's responsible for ourselves in time and space is quieted. So a moment of flow that may only be a brief moment and a moment of flow that could last an hour may seem like the same experience to the user, and it's almost impossible to describe these experiences in terms of time. So the next experience that I had was at the same time in my life, at the local swimming pool, playing a game familiar to just about any kid, which is, how far can you swim underwater while holding your breath? How many laps of the pool can you do? And at this point in time, I think the average for my friends and I were maybe a lap and a half, maybe 2 laps if we were lucky, before we would have to come up for air, gasping for air. And just like with the video game, one time, I came back into awareness of myself, into my body, that I was underwater and that I was swimming. I wasn't panicking, I wasn't struggling for air, and I realized I had been under there for much longer than I had previously. When I did finally come up for air, I realized I had swum about 5, maybe 6 laps, and I was surrounded by astonished faces at everybody at the swimming pool who had seen me go 6 laps, whereas no one had done more than 1 or 2 previously. I couldn't explain exactly why I was able to do that, except I know that it was because I slipped into that flow state and I was able to forget about myself and just enjoy the experience and live in the moment in that experience. Now, this was in an era before the X Games and before Red Bull Signature Series, before action sports was even a common phrase. And so back then, if you wanted to live a life that was filled with daredevilry and death defiance, you had one hero to follow, and that was Evel Knievel. And so for better or for worse, Evel Knievel inspired an entire generation of kids to pop wheelies, to create ramps, and jump their bikes over just about anything that wasn't nailed down. And in my neighborhood, we were no different. We would set up the ramps and jump over kids, trash cans, dogs, cars, small buildings. We were truly seeking out this flow state experience in these brief moments and these thrilling stunts that we would put together. So, smash cut to me, waking up in the hospital, in the ICU, having just barely survived a pretty traumatic bicycle accident. And I had a lot of time while I was in the hospital healing to contemplate the fact that my body was connected to all these medical machines. There were tubes and wires sticking out of every orifice, including a few that they made just for the occasion. There were machines beeping and clicking all night long, and for months I had an opportunity to get familiar with this idea of the human body and technology merging as one. And so at that point, my hero worship shifted a little bit to the Bionic Man. The $6 Million Man represented something really important to me at that time because, like myself, he had barely survived a traumatic accident. And like myself, he had modern technology incorporated into his body to allow him to heal and get better. And in his case, he actually became a bit of a superhero with the extra powers that he had. So I would tell all my friends at that time that I too was bionic. They didn't really want to believe me, but I had so many great scars that they just kind of let me go with that. So at that point, I realized that my chase of the flow state and my relationship with technology were intertwined. And this notion of the human-machine hybrid was somehow central to my experience of flow state. And so I started pursuing that in many ways. In particular, I became an artist, a sculptor, and a robot maker, and I created a robot called SPARKY, which is essentially a two-way wireless telepresence device that allows the controller, in this case me, to be anywhere in the world while the robot is somewhere else. And back then, I wanted to do it so that I could have a presence at my own art openings, but I could still be at home in my pajamas while it was happening. Nowadays, with the backbone of the internet and high-speed data, there are many commercial options for telepresence robots that run over the internet. And so we see these devices showing up in hospitals, in museums, in work settings, in schools. In fact, Edward Snowden famously gave an entire TED Talk through a telepresence robot while he was in Russia. But back in the early days, this SPARKY device was made from found objects. It used pirate video transmission technologies that we cobbled together, found motors and wheelchair parts and RC parts. And so the experience of driving SPARKY was really difficult. The video was grainy, the audio was bad, the robot was hard to control, and typically SPARKY would be in social settings like museum openings or corporate events, frequently surrounded by little kids, priceless art, and all kinds of shiny people. I often describe the experience of driving the early SPARKY as flying an airplane through a snowstorm without instruments while also hosting a children's birthday party. It was the quintessential out-of-body experience, the definition of a flow state experience. Now, cut to a few years ago, my friends and I, we all build robots, and we like to get together on Friday night and drink some beers and show off what we're working on. And it's inevitable that we start smashing our robots together in an informal fight club. It wasn't hard for us to adopt the new technology of drones about 4 or 5 years ago, and we basically started an arms race. And the goal was to build better drones for games and sports. And because of a single technology innovation that came along about 2 years ago, drone racing was invented. And essentially what that technology is are these super small, very fast drones that have a video camera and a wireless transmitter on it, as well as a pair of goggles that's worn by the pilot. So the pilot is basically in a blacked out experience. The only sensory input that they're getting is the video that's coming in, and the only real movement that's required from them is their thumbs. So it's this very interesting out-of-body experience, and as you can see from the video, it's a very exciting and thrilling thing to be sitting in the cockpit of that drone virtually while it's going 50, 60, 70 miles an hour, knowing that there's no particular risk to life and limb because even if you crash the drone, you're still going to be okay. Other barriers of entry to drone racing include the fact that you don't have to climb to the top of a mountain or jump off of a mountain or jump out of an airplane or anything like that to experience the fun of drone racing and thereby the experience of this flow state that this FPV experience delivers. And because of the way it's so isolating from everything else, it's like a main line to flow state. It's like an injection of pure flow. And like I mentioned earlier, other people who had found that flow state in their lives made them healthier and happier. I found that many people in my own community have similar stories. They say how, prior to getting into drone racing, their bodies were falling apart. They were depressed. They were suicidal. They've discovered drone racing, and by getting to do this experience every day, several times a day, and sometimes 20 and 30 times a day, experiencing that flow state on such a regular basis, that they have turned their lives around, their health has improved, they're no longer depressed. In fact, some of them are becoming worldwide stars in this growing sport of drone racing, which in just a few short years has gained so much popularity around the world that it went from an obscure hobby among nerds to a worldwide sport with $1 million prize purse and TV deals being made in every direction. So it's clear that drone racing is here to stay. Most people look at the future of drone racing as here to stay simply because of how much fun it is and how exciting it is to perform. But I actually think that there's something more going on. When I look at the future of drone racing, I don't see it just as the next big consumer sport. I actually see it as potentially the next big wonder drug. Thank you very much.